The house used to be full of noise, Daniel's laughter echoing from the kitchen, the clinking of dishes, the smell of freshly baked bread. For 28 years, that sound was my proof that I hadn't failed as a mother. He grew up kind, gentle, hard-working, the kind of man any mother would be proud of. When he graduated from university, I thought my job was complete. But motherhood doesn't end with a diploma. You keep worrying, you keep waiting for a call, for a visit, for a reason to still matter. Then one evening, Daniel walked in with a smile I hadn't seen before. It wasn't for me. It was for the woman standing next to him. "Mom," he said, holding her hand, "this is Clara." Clara. The name sounded elegant, confident, too polished for my small, quiet home. She was beautiful, with perfect hair, perfect posture, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She shook my hand softly, as if she was afraid of catching something. We sat at the table. I served roast chicken, Daniel's favorite, just like always. But Clara pushed the food around her plate and whispered something to him. He laughed. I didn't hear what she said, but I saw her smirk. That night, when I washed the dishes, Daniel offered to help. Clara stood by the doorway, watching. When he accidentally dropped a glass, she frowned. A small, sharp frown that cut through the warmth in the room. I saw it. He didn't. After they left, the house felt smaller, quieter. I stood in the doorway, long after their car disappeared. Something inside me whispered, "This is the beginning of the end." Days turned into weeks. Daniel visited often, always with Clara. She started rearranging things. The cushions, the photos on the wall, the vase that used to sit by the window. "It'll look more modern this way," she said. I smiled politely, but every small change felt like an erasure. A little less of me, a little more of her. She called me Margaret, not Mom. Every time she said it, I felt the distance grow. One afternoon, Daniel mentioned they were planning a short trip. "Clara thinks it'd be nice to visit her parents," he said. "Oh," I replied softly, "when do I get to meet them?" Clara smiled, too sweetly. "Maybe someday. Maybe someday." The words hung in the air like smoke. The day after they left, I went into Daniel's old room to dust. Everything was the same. The trophies, the books, the childhood photos. On his desk, I found a picture of us from years ago. He was 6, missing a front tooth, hugging me with both arms. I held that photo against my chest. My heart ached, but not with pride, with fear, because I realized something terrible. I had built my life around being needed, and now someone else had taken that place. Weeks later, Daniel called. His voice was bright. "Mom, Clara and I have big news." My heart skipped. "You're getting married." He laughed. "How did you know?" Because I could hear it, the way he said her name, the way his life was already orbiting around her. They invited me to dinner to celebrate. I spent hours choosing what to wear, baking his favorite pie. I told myself, she's not taking him away, she's giving him happiness. But when I arrived, it wasn't the same. They had moved into a small apartment. Clara opened the door, not Daniel. She looked surprised, or annoyed. I couldn't tell. "Oh, Margaret, you came," she said flatly. Daniel appeared behind her, smiling, unaware of the chill in her tone. Dinner was polite. Too polite. Every time I tried to speak, Clara interrupted. When I mentioned Daniel's childhood, she rolled her eyes. When I complimented the apartment, she corrected me. Actually, it was my idea to pick this one. At one point, Daniel's phone rang. He excused himself, stepping outside to answer. Silence filled the room. I tried to make small talk. "You've built a lovely home," I said softly. She looked at me, tilting her head. "We're still adjusting. Daniel's used to you doing everything for him, but he'll learn." The words sliced through me. She smiled as if she hadn't just stabbed my heart. When Daniel came back, she changed completely, laughing, touching his arm, pretending warmth. He didn't notice. He never noticed. That night, as I walked home, rain began to fall. The city lights blurred through my tears. I wanted to tell myself that it was just insecurity, that I was overthinking, but a mother's heart knows. Something was changing, and not in my favor. The next morning, I found Daniel's old mug in the kitchen. I washed it carefully and placed it on the shelf, the same shelf where my husband's cup used to be. Two symbols of the men I'd loved and lost in different ways. I whispered to the empty room, "You were the perfect son, Daniel." I just didn't know perfection doesn't last forever. It started with a change in Daniel's tone. He was still loving, still gentle, but distracted. Whenever I called, his answers grew shorter. "Sorry, Mom. I'm busy," he'd say. Laughter and voices in the background. Sometimes I'd hear Clara's voice, soft but commanding. I told myself it was normal. Newlyweds have their own world. But a mother always knows when something is off. Weeks turned into months. Their visits became rare, and when they did come, Clara always led the conversation. She'd talk about the new job Daniel had. Her suggestion, of course. About their plans to buy a house. Her choice of neighborhood. About how Daniel had finally learned to eat healthier, to dress better, to think differently. Each story ended the same way. Clara changed him. Once I laughed and said, "He used to love my roast chicken." She smiled. That same perfect poison smile. "Oh yes, he used to. But now we eat light dinners. Too much oil isn't good for him." Her tone wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was kind. Condescendingly kind. Daniel didn't notice the frost between us. When he looked at me, he still saw his mother. But when he looked at her, he saw his future. One Sunday afternoon, I invited them for lunch. I cooked all of Daniel's favorites. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, lemon pie. The table looked beautiful. But when they arrived, Clara's nose twitched. "Oh, it smells heavy." They sat. I served. Daniel smiled, trying to keep peace, but I saw him hesitating with every bite. Clara's fork barely touched her plate. "Mom, you really didn't have to go through all this trouble," he said. Trouble, that word stung. I had spent my whole life cooking for him, and now it was trouble. After lunch, Clara offered to help clean up. I was surprised. Maybe she was trying. But when we were alone in the kitchen, her voice dropped. "Margaret," she said quietly, her smile gone. "I know you mean well, but Daniel and I need space. You don't have to call so often. He feels guilty when he can't answer." I froze. "He told you that?" She shrugged, rinsing a plate. "He doesn't want to hurt you. But you need to understand boundaries." Boundaries. Another modern word for walls. I wanted to scream, to tell her she didn't understand what it meant to raise a child alone. To spend years sewing clothes, skipping meals, praying for every breath he took. But I didn't. Because she had already won that argument before it even began. When they left that day, I stood at the window again, watching, waiting, just like before, only this time, I knew they wouldn't look back. A few weeks later, Daniel called. His voice was soft, cautious. "Mom, Clara's parents invited us over this weekend. Maybe we'll stay the night. You don't mind, right?" I smiled even though he couldn't see it. "Of course not, sweetheart. Have fun." But after the call ended, I realized something chilling. I had never met her parents, and yet they were already his family. Then came the day that broke the illusion. I was shopping downtown when I saw them. Daniel and Clara, in a small cafe. They were sitting close, his hand on hers. It should have been a beautiful sight. My son happy, in love. But what froze me wasn't the love. It was the look Clara gave me when our eyes met. Cold, possessive, as if to say, "He's mine now." I waved some. Daniel didn't see me. She whispered something to him, and he turned his head, away from me. For the first time, I felt invisible, not just to the world, but to my own blood. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked around the house touching everything he'd left behind. His old books, his trophies, the guitar he never learned to play. The silence felt heavier than ever. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, waiting for it to light up. It didn't. I began writing him a message. I saw you today. You looked happy. But I deleted it. Because it sounded needy, desperate, and mothers are not supposed to be desperate. A few days later, Daniel finally visited. Alone. When I opened the door, I wanted to hug him, but something held me back. He looked tired, uncertain. He avoided my eyes as he said, Mom, Clara thinks we should spend more time focusing on each other for a while. She says I need to be independent. I laughed softly, though my heart was breaking. Independent from your mom? He sighed. You know what she means. I didn't. Not really. He looked around the room, noticing the dust on the shelves, the wilting flowers by the window. Are you okay, Mom? I smiled. Of course, why wouldn't I be? He nodded, but he didn't believe me. He stayed for tea, quiet, awkward tea, and when he left he hugged me, quickly, like someone afraid of lingering too long. As the door closed behind him, I whispered, the first crack isn't when love fades, it's when it begins to be replaced. That night, the rain returned. It always did when my heart broke. I looked out the window and saw my reflection in the glass, a lonely woman staring at the empty street, clutching a photo of a boy who once needed her for everything. And for the first time, I admitted the truth. I'd been avoiding. Daniel wasn't drifting away. He was being pulled, and the one holding the rope was smiling, with perfect hair and perfect hands, from the other end. They say a mother's happiest day is the day her child gets married. But no one tells you what it feels like when you realize the wedding isn't meant for you to witness love. It's meant to show you where you no longer belong. The wedding announcement came through a simple phone call. Daniel's voice trembled with excitement. Mom, we finally set the date. It's happening this summer. I forced a smile, clutching the phone tightly. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Have you found a venue? He hesitated. Clara's handling most of it. You'll love it. You'll love it. A phrase that should have comforted me, but somehow, it sounded like a warning. Weeks turned into a blur of silence. No invitations, no discussions, no fittings. When I finally asked Daniel if I could help with the preparations, his tone was gentle but distant. Oh, Mom, Clara already has everything under control. You just relax, okay? Relax. As if motherhood were something you could turn off like a light switch. Still, I tried. I bought a dress, soft blue, modest, the color he said always made me look calm. I kept it hanging in the wardrobe, imagining the moment he'd see me walking toward him, proud and tearful. But when the invitation arrived, I noticed something strange. It didn't say Daniel and Clara invite you to their wedding. It said Clara and Daniel, her name first, his second. It was a small thing, but small things have power, especially when they keep adding up. A week before the ceremony, Clara called me. It was the first time she had ever called me directly. Margaret, she began, her tone sweet but sharp. We've decided to keep the wedding simple, just close friends and immediate family. I frowned. I understand. Of course, there won't be a seating arrangement for everyone. So if you could just sit near the back, that would be lovely. We'll make sure you can see. Near the back. She might as well have said out of sight. When the call ended, I stood still, the phone pressed against my chest. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed awake when Daniel was a baby, afraid he'd stop breathing. All the years of scraping money together so he could go to university. And now my place was at the back. The wedding day arrived bright and cruelly beautiful. The church was filled with flowers and laughter. A scene from a magazine, not from my life. I walked in alone. No one greeted me. I searched for my son, among the crowd, but he was surrounded. Friends, co-workers, photographers. When he finally saw me, his eyes lit up. Mom, you made it. I laughed softly. Of course I did. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Before I could hug him, Clara appeared, glowing, perfect, radiant. She slipped her arm through his, and smiled at me. Oh, Margaret, that dress looks traditional. It's nice. Traditional. Another word for old. The ceremony began. I sat in the back, just as she'd asked. From there I could barely see Daniel's face, just the outline of his shoulders as he said his vows. I promise to stand by you, Clara. Always. His voice broke slightly on her name, and when he kissed her, the room erupted in applause. I clapped too, mechanically softly, because that's what you do when you're a mother. You celebrate even when it hurts. After the ceremony, photos began. I waited, hoping someone would call me. No one did. When I tried to step closer, Clara's maid of honor gently blocked me. Sorry, they're doing family shots right now. Family. I stood there, holding my purse tightly, pretending to admire the flowers. Then I saw them. Clara's parents, standing proudly beside the couple, smiling for the camera. Daniel's arm was around Clara's mother. His smile, my son's smile, was for her. That was the moment I felt something inside me fracture. The reception was louder, full of people I didn't know. I found a small corner table, and sat alone. The music drowned my thoughts. Once Daniel came by to check on me. Mom, are you okay? I smiled. Perfectly fine, sweetheart. He kissed my forehead quickly, distracted by someone calling his name. Clara's hand found his arm again, guiding him away. I watched them dance, moving in sync to a song I didn't recognize. Everyone cheered. Everyone except me. The waiter passed by, offering champagne. I shook my head. My throat was too tight to drink. When it was time to leave, I searched for Daniel to say goodbye, but he was nowhere to be found. Finally I spotted him outside, helping Clara into a car. He turned to me and smiled. That same boyish smile I'd loved since the day he was born. Mom, thank you for coming. It means the world. He hugged me quickly. Too quickly, then climbed into the car. Clara waved politely from the window, and just like that they were gone. The crowd began to thin. I stood under the archway of the church, watching the petals fall, feeling the wind pick up around me. The laughter grew distant, fading into echoes. For years I had dreamed of my son's wedding, but not like this. Not as a bystander, not as an outsider. I looked down at the bouquet I had brought, small white roses, his childhood favorite. I left them on the church steps. As I walked away, I whispered to the empty air, "You didn't lose a son today, Margaret. You just realized he was never yours to keep." That night, back home, I placed my blue dress neatly into the closet. It smelled faintly of perfume and sorrow. Then I sat at the kitchen table, the silence heavy around me, and wrote in my journal, "The wedding broke me, not because he married her, but because he didn't look back." When a child leaves home, the house doesn't just lose a voice, it loses its heartbeat. The walls remember, the floors echo, and the air still smells like the life that used to live there. The morning after the wedding, I woke to an unfamiliar sound, silence. Not the gentle, peaceful kind. The heavy kind that presses on your chest, that makes you aware of every tick of the clock. The kind that doesn't go away. Daniel's laughter had always filled this house. Even after he grew older, there was always some trace of him. His shoes by the door, the way he'd hum in the shower, the late-night calls from his room when he thought I was asleep. Now there was nothing. A few days later I got a text. "We'll come by this weekend to pick up the rest of my stuff. Love you, Mom." The rest of his stuff. 3 decades of memories, packed into boxes labeled old things. I spent hours walking around the house before they came. Dusting shelves that didn't need dusting. Straightening photos that no one looked at. Trying to convince myself that if I made the house perfect, he might feel at home again. But when they arrived, it wasn't Daniel who came in first. It was Clara. She looked around like an inspector evaluating a property. "Daniel, maybe we should just rent a truck," she said. "There's so much clutter here." Clutter, my son's childhood, reduced to clutter. Daniel smiled awkwardly. "We'll sort it out, Clara." I stood quietly, pretending to be busy, watching her wrap my memories in cold silence. She picked up an old family photo. Daniel, age 8, covered in mud, holding a paper kite. "This is cute," she said. "But maybe you can give it to us later, Margaret." We'll make a digital album. She didn't even wait for my answer. They packed quickly. I tried to help, but every time I reached for something, Clara was already there. At one point, I reached for Daniel's old blanket, the one I made when he was a baby. He smiled faintly. Wow, this thing's still around. Clara laughed. Maybe we should frame it, like a museum piece. I smiled too, but inside something cracked. When they were done, Daniel hugged me. Mom, I'll call you soon, okay? Of course, sweetheart. He kissed my cheek, then carried the last box to the car. Clara followed behind, waving politely. And just like that, the door closed. The house changed after that day. Every sound became too loud. The creak of the stairs, the hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of wind through the curtains. I kept expecting Daniel's key to turn in the lock. It never did. Days bled into nights. I started talking to the furniture, not because I was losing my mind, but because silence needs conversation to survive. Sometimes I cooked for two, then remembered there was no one coming. Sometimes I sat by the phone, waiting for it to ring, even though I knew it wouldn't. One evening, the phone finally did ring. Daniel, my heart leapt. Mom, he said, Clara and I are really busy settling in, but we'll visit soon. I promise. I smiled. No rush. I know you're building your life. He paused. Clara says I should focus on work more. She wants us to have structure. Structure. Another word for distance. Before hanging up, I asked softly, do you still have that blanket? He laughed. Of course. Don't worry about me, Mom. I'm fine. Then the line went dead, and I stared at the receiver, realizing he hadn't asked how I was. The weeks that followed blurred together. I tried to fill the void, morning walks, church visits, reading old letters, but everything led me back to the same empty hallway, the same cold kitchen table, the same half-drunk cup of tea. Neighbors asked how the newlyweds were doing. I smiled and lied. They're wonderful, but inside, I was fading. Quietly, invisibly. One night, as rain tapped against the windows, I wandered into Daniel's old room. It still smelled faintly of him. Books, cologne, life. I sat on his bed and opened a drawer. Inside, I found a small forgotten box. Inside were letters, birthday cards I'd written him as a child, small notes I'd slipped into his lunchbox, a photo of the two of us at the beach. I pressed the photo to my lips and whispered, I wish love was enough to keep someone from leaving. The next morning, I decided to visit unannounced. I baked his favorite pie, wrapped it carefully, and took the bus to their apartment. When I arrived, the building was sleek and cold, nothing like home. I rang the bell. Clara opened the door, surprised. Margaret, what are you doing here? I smiled. I made something for Daniel. Is he home? Her eyes flickered. He's busy. We're about to go out. I hesitated. Just 5 minutes. She sighed and stepped aside. Daniel appeared from the hallway, adjusting his tie. Mom, you didn't tell me you were coming. I wanted to surprise you, I said softly, holding out the pie. He smiled awkwardly. That's so sweet. But, we were just leaving. Can I call you later? Clara's hand rested on his arm, silent but firm. I nodded, placing the pie on the counter. Of course, sweetheart. As I turned to leave, Clara's voice followed me, polite, but sharp enough to cut. You don't have to drop by unannounced, Margaret. It's overwhelming sometimes. I froze, my back to her. Then I simply said, you don't have to worry. I won't. Outside, the wind was cold. The bus stop was empty. As I waited, I looked down at my hands, trembling, old, tired. Hands that had held him, fed him, protected him. Hands that now held nothing. When I returned home, I left the lights off. The darkness didn't scare me anymore. It felt honest. I sat in the quiet and whispered. They say time heals all wounds, but time doesn't heal what's still bleeding. It only teaches you how to hide the pain, until one day you run out of places to hide it. It had been 3 months since Daniel's wedding, 3 months since I had last heard his laugh echo through my house, 3 months since anyone had said my name with warmth. At first I told myself they were just busy. Newlyweds always are. They have to build routines, learn to live together, find balance. I repeated those excuses until they sounded like lullabies. But one morning, as I stared at my silent phone, I realized I had been singing myself to sleep with lies. The loneliness became unbearable. The walls of the house seemed to whisper, "Call him, go see him." So I did. I dressed carefully. The floral dress Daniel used to compliment, light makeup, a small scarf. I baked his favorite cookies, wrapped them in foil, and took the same old bus route I had taken since he was in school. The closer I got, the more my hands trembled. I kept imagining how he'd smile when he saw me. Maybe he'd hug me. Maybe he'd invite me in for tea. I told myself, "He's still your son, Margaret. Nothing can change that." But I was wrong. When I reached their building, the intercom felt foreign, shiny, new, distant. I pressed the button labeled D&C Evans. A few seconds later a voice crackled through. "Clara's." "Yes, it's Margaret." A long pause, then "Oh, Daniel's resting right now." My heart stung. "Just for a moment, please. I brought him something." Silence. Then the buzzer clicked. When I stepped inside, the air smelled of lavender and new furniture, a cold, perfect scent. The apartment looked like a magazine spread. Clean, colorless, lifeless. Every photo on the wall was of them, smiling, polished, flawless. Not one photo of Daniel as a child. Not one trace of me. Clara appeared from the kitchen, perfectly dressed as always. "Oh, Margaret," she said softly. "You really didn't need to come all this way." I smiled. "I just wanted to see you both." She hesitated before calling, "Daniel, your mother's here." A few seconds later, my son appeared, barefoot, sleepy-eyed, in a white shirt. For a moment, he looked like my little boy again. "Mom?" he said, surprised. Then, after a short pause, "Hi." "Not hi, Mom, just hi." He hugged me lightly. I handed him the cookies. "I made your favorite." He smiled politely, glancing toward Clara. "That's really nice. Thanks." I waited for him to open them, to eat one, to remember. But he didn't. He just set them on the counter, untouched. Clara leaned against the wall, her arms folded. "So, Margaret, how's the house?" "It's quiet," I said softly. She smiled. "Quiet can be good." Daniel nodded absently, checking his phone. The small talk was painful, every sentence ending in silence, every silence heavier than the last. When I mentioned the garden, Daniel's face brightened. "Do you still have those roses I planted?" I smiled, finally feeling warmth. "Yes, they're blooming beautifully." Before I could continue, Clara cut in. "Oh, roses are so old-fashioned, aren't they? We're thinking of getting succulents instead. Less emotional upkeep." Her words hung in the air. Less emotional upkeep. Daniel didn't notice the sting. He just laughed softly. "Yeah, maybe that's better." I looked at him then. Really looked. He wasn't my boy anymore. He was someone else's husband. Someone else's version of himself. After a while, Clara excused herself to take a call. Daniel finally sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Mom, I'm sorry we haven't visited. Work's been crazy. You know how it is." I smiled gently. "Of course, sweetheart. I understand." He looked at me with guilt in his eyes. For a brief moment, I thought he might apologize for everything. The distance, the coldness, the way he'd slowly erased me. But instead, he said, "Clara thinks it might be better if you call before dropping by next time. She gets anxious when plans change suddenly." My chest tightened. "Anxious?" He nodded. "You know how she is." I wanted to ask him, "What about me, Daniel? Don't you see how I'm fading? Don't you see how she's pulling you further away?" But I didn't, because I could already see the answer in his eyes. When Clara came back, The warmth disappeared again. She smiled sweetly. "Would you like some water, Margaret?" I shook my head. "No, thank you. I should be going." Daniel walked me to the door. He didn't offer to carry my bag, didn't insist I stay longer. He just said, "I'll call you soon, okay?" I nodded. "I know." Outside, the wind was sharp. I stood on the pavement, staring up at their window. For a brief second, I saw their silhouettes inside. Clara's arm around him, his head bent toward her. I whispered, "You don't even know what you've lost, Daniel, but one day, you will." When I got home, I set the tin of cookies on the counter, the same kind I'd made for him as a child. I looked at my empty kitchen, and imagined the way his small hands used to grab them, the way he'd smile with crumbs on his face. I sat down, folded my hands, and let the tears fall silently onto the table. "The hardest part isn't losing your child," I wrote later in my diary. "It's watching them live happily without you, as if you were never part of the story." That night, the silence was deafening again. I thought about calling him, just to hear his voice, but I didn't. Instead, I whispered to the dark, "A mother's love doesn't fade, Daniel. It just learns how to live in the shadows. You never forget the day your child stops defending you. It's like watching the sun go dark, and realizing it's never rising again." It had been 2 weeks since my visit. I hadn't heard from Daniel once. No calls, no texts, not even a message asking if I got home safely. The cookies I'd baked were still sitting in their tin, untouched, the foil slightly torn from where I'd opened it to check. They had gone stale, just like the bond between us. But mothers are stubborn creatures. We keep hoping even when there's nothing left to hope for. So when the phone finally rang one quiet afternoon, I answered on the first ring. "Mom," Daniel said softly. The sound of his voice made my heart leap. "Daniel, it's been so long, sweetheart." He hesitated. "Yeah, listen, Clara and I were wondering if you could come over this weekend. There's something we need to talk about." My heart fluttered. Maybe they wanted to apologize. Maybe they'd realized how distant they'd been. "Of course," I said quickly. "I'll bring lunch. Your favorite stew." "No, Mom," he interrupted gently. "Don't bring anything. Just come." That pause should have warned me. But hope is blind. When I arrived, the air in their apartment felt heavier than before. Clara was standing by the window, arms crossed, eyes cold. Daniel sat on the couch, his posture tight, his jaw set. Something was wrong. Did something happen? I asked carefully. Daniel rubbed his temples. "Mom, please sit down." I obeyed, clutching my purse in my lap like a shield. Clara spoke first. Her tone was calm but sharp. "Margaret, I know you mean well, but we need some boundaries." My stomach dropped. "Boundaries?" She nodded slowly, as if speaking to a child. "Yes, Daniel and I are trying to build our own life together, but lately, it feels like you're interfering." I blinked, confused. "Interfering? Clara, I've barely seen you in months." She exchanged a glance with Daniel, a silent conversation that excluded me entirely. Then Daniel sighed. "Mom, Clara's right. You've been calling a lot, and showing up unannounced." I interrupted. "I came once, because I missed you." He winced. "I know, but it makes Clara uncomfortable." Uncomfortable. The word hit me harder than a slap. Clara leaned forward, voice smooth as glass. "It's not just that, Margaret. It's the way you talk to Daniel, like you're still the one who has to take care of him. He's a man now. My husband." I looked at her, this young woman who'd barely known him a few years, and I saw not a wife, but a thief. She had taken my son's loyalty, his time, his love, and now, she was taking my place entirely. My voice trembled. "Clara, I never meant to intrude. You just don't know how to let go." She cut in. Daniel looked down at his hands. He didn't defend me. Something inside me cracked. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, how I'd fight for him, how he'd choose me because I was his mother. But now, faced with his silence, I realized the battle was already lost. I stood up slowly. "Daniel," I said, forcing calm into my voice. Do you feel this way too? He hesitated. Too long, then he nodded. I think Clara just wants peace, Mom. Maybe a little space will help. A little space. The same words my husband had used years ago before he walked out the door and never came back. I laughed quietly. A hollow, trembling sound. Space, I repeated. How much space, Daniel? Enough for you to forget me completely. Mom, please don't make this harder, he said softly. I turned to Clara. You're very good at this. She tilted her head. At what? At turning love into guilt. For a moment her expression faltered. Then she smiled victorious. Maybe it's just time to move on. Daniel reached out to touch my hand, but I stepped back. Don't, I whispered. My voice was shaking but my heart had gone cold. You want space? I said quietly. Fine, you can have all the space in the world. I picked up my purse and walked toward the door. Daniel followed. Mom, please, I turned around, my eyes wet but steady. One day, Daniel, when you have a child of your own, you'll understand. You'll see how it feels to be replaced by the person they love most. And when that day comes, you'll remember me. Then I walked out. Outside, the sky was gray, heavy with rain. I didn't take the bus this time. I walked all the way home, through streets blurred by tears and headlights. When I finally reached my front porch, I stopped. The garden Daniel had planted years ago was dying. The roses were wilting, petals scattered like broken hearts across the soil. I knelt down, brushing a fallen bloom with trembling fingers. Even flowers know when they're no longer wanted, I whispered. That night, I sat by the window, staring at the empty road. I kept expecting his car to appear, headlights cutting through the dark, him running to the door like he used to when he was little. But the street stayed empty. Hours passed. The clock ticked. The phone stayed silent. Finally, I opened my diary and wrote, "There's a special kind of pain that belongs only to mothers. The pain of being loved less every day by the person you love most." I closed the book, placed it on the table, and blew out the candle. In the darkness, I whispered to myself, he chose her and I chose silence. But silence doesn't mean peace. It just means the war is happening inside me now. Some words are never meant to be spoken aloud. They live between ink and tears, waiting for someone brave enough to read them. Days turned into weeks after the talk. No calls, no visits, just silence. Heavy, endless silence. Every morning, I would wake up and glance at the phone, half expecting it to ring. It never did. The house had never felt so large. The ticking clock echoed like footsteps in an empty church. The walls seemed to breathe, sighs of the life that used to fill them. I started talking to myself, whispering little thoughts just to break the quiet. Maybe he's busy. Maybe he's waiting for the right time. But deep down, I knew Daniel wasn't coming back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. One rainy evening, as I sat staring out the window, I noticed his old jacket still hanging by the door. The same brown one he wore when he helped me paint the porch years ago. I'd kept it there all this time. A silent welcome, a promise that this would always be his home. But now it just looked like a relic. Something left behind. I pulled it off the hanger and pressed it to my chest. It still smelled faintly of him. Soap and sawdust and summer. My eyes burned with tears. That's when I decided to write. Not a message, not a text. A letter, not to send, not to fix, but to release. I sat at the kitchen table, took out my old stationery, the one with roses on the corners, and began, "Dear Daniel, I'm writing this because speaking hurts too much. Every time I try to say your name, it feels like something inside me breaks a little more. I want you to know that I forgive you, not because you asked for it, you didn't, but because carrying anger would only make me smaller. I was never trying to keep you. I was trying to keep the part of me that existed because of you. When your father died, I thought my world had ended, but then you smiled. You were just 8 years old, and I realized I still had something worth living for. You saved me, Daniel. You gave my life meaning, and maybe that's the mistake I made, loving you so completely that I forgot I was allowed to exist without you. Clara didn't steal you. She simply walked into a space that was already too full of me. Maybe she's not cruel. Maybe she's just afraid that I'm the kind of love that never really leaves. I don't hate her. I just miss you. I miss the boy who used to tell me everything. The boy who'd run into the kitchen asking what's for dinner. The boy who believed I could fix anything with a kiss and a story. I know you're not that boy anymore. You've grown up. You have your own life. Your own family. That's what I always wanted for you. I just didn't realize that getting what I wanted would hurt this much. If you ever read this, know that you were loved, truly, deeply, endlessly. Love, Mom. When I finished, the paper was damp with tears. I folded it carefully, placed it inside an old envelope, and sealed it with trembling hands. I didn't write an address. There was nowhere to send it. Instead, I slipped it into a small wooden box that used to hold Daniel's childhood drawings. Inside were scraps of his handwriting, birthday cards, a crayon doodle of us in the garden. I added the letter to the box and whispered, "You'll find this one day." Days passed. Then one afternoon I heard a knock on the door. My heart skipped. For a moment I thought it might be Daniel, but when I opened it, a young woman stood there. She was dressed neatly, holding a clipboard. "Mrs. Evans." "Yes, I'm from the community center," she said. "We're organizing a charity garden project. Your neighbor said you have a lovely yard and might want to join." I almost said no, but then she smiled. A real smile, warm and sincere, and something inside me softened. "All right," I said quietly. "I'll come by." That weekend, I found myself surrounded by laughter, soil, and sunlight. Women my age, some older, planting flowers, sharing stories. For the first time in months, I felt seen. One woman, Helen, leaned toward me and said, "You've got such a gentle touch. Have you always gardened?" I nodded. "My son planted roses when he was little." Her eyes softened. "I lost my daughter last year. Gardening helps, doesn't it?" I smiled faintly. "It's the only thing that still listens." That night I went home with dirt under my nails and peace in my chest. I looked at the empty chair across from me and whispered, "Maybe I'm learning how to be me again, Daniel." Then just as I was about to turn off the lights, I heard the faint buzz of my phone. A message from Daniel. "Hi, Mom. You're home tomorrow? I'd like to stop by." My breath caught. My hands trembled. After weeks of silence, those few words felt like sunlight breaking through a storm. I typed and erased my reply 3 times before sending. "Yes, sweetheart. I'll be here." That night I didn't sleep. I kept walking through the house, fixing little things, lighting candles, arranging the flowers I'd picked. I even put the tin of cookies on the table, fresh this time. When dawn came, I stood by the window, heart pounding, waiting, but as the hours passed, no one came. Afternoon turned to evening. The cookies went cold. The candles burned low. Finally, my phone buzzed again. Another message. "Sorry, Mom. Something came up. I'll try another day." I read it 3 times before setting the phone down. Then I walked to the wooden box, opened it, and took out the letter. This time I didn't cry. I just whispered, "Maybe this is all I'll ever get." Unsent words and unfinished visits. But even if he never reads it, he'll always live in every line I wrote. I folded the letter again, placed it back inside, and closed the lid gently. Outside, the garden was quiet, but a single rose had bloomed overnight, its petals opening toward the fading sun. I smiled softly. "You're still growing, Daniel," I whispered, "and somehow, so am I." Coming home isn't always what you expect. Sometimes the people you thought you loved most have already moved on and left your memories behind. It had been nearly a month since Daniel's last message, the one that promised a visit that never came. I tried not to think about it. I kept busy. The garden, small walks, reading, cooking, but every corner of the house reminded me of him, the creak of the stairs, the chair he once sat in, the faint smell of cologne lingering in his old room. Then, one rainy afternoon, I heard the sound of tires on the driveway. My heart leapt. I ran to the window. Daniel was here. My hands shook as I opened the door. He stood there, drenched, coat clinging to his shoulders, eyes wide, hesitant. "Mom," he began. I smiled, unable to contain the rush of relief. "Daniel, come in, come in, you're soaked." He stepped inside, dripping water onto the old rug. "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. It's been complicated." I waved away his apology. "It's fine, sweetheart." Really, for a few moments, we stood there, silent, looking at each other. The boy I once knew was still there, but hidden behind the man he had become, polite, careful, distant. I led him to the living room, where I had rearranged the furniture slightly, lit a few candles, and set fresh flowers on the table. "You look different," I said softly, trying to hide my trembling voice. "I guess life changes people," he said, smiling faintly. I nodded. "Yes, sometimes not in ways we expect." We sat down, the rain pattering against the windows, the room filled with tension and unspoken words. I poured tea and handed him a cup. He accepted it, his fingers brushing mine briefly. A spark of the past, gone too quickly. "Mom," he said finally, staring into the cup. "I've been thinking about everything. About us, about Clara, about you." My chest tightened. "What about me?" He hesitated. I know I've been distant. I didn't mean to hurt you. I don't know how to balance it. Clara, she's my wife. She's everything now." My hands tightened around my own cup. "Everything?" I whispered. "Yes." His voice was steady, final. "Everything I am belongs to her now." I felt something inside me break. Not the old familiar sadness, but something sharper, colder. "Everything," I repeated, letting the words sink in. "Even me." He looked down. "Mom, she? I don't know how to be both. And Clara, she wants it to be one or the other." The words were a hammer to my chest. I realized, in that instant, that the son I had loved all his life, the boy who used to run to me when he was scared, who needed me every day, had chosen someone else over me. Entirely. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of decades pressing down. "Daniel, I came today hoping, maybe we could still be mine, just for a little while. But it seems, you've already decided." He shifted uncomfortably, guilt flashing in his eyes. "Mom, it's not that I don't love you, but Clara, she needs me, and I can't hurt her." "Ah," I said softly, the bitterest part of grief rising to my throat. "Of course, I understand now. You're loyal to her, not to me." For a moment, we just stood there, the room silent, except for the rain. I realized then that no words could bridge the gap anymore. He took a hesitant step toward me. "Mom, I don't want to lose you completely." I shook my head. "You already have, Daniel. I'm here, but you've gone." He swallowed, eyes brimming, but he didn't argue. I reached for his hand, once, gently. He let me hold it, then slowly withdrew. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I nodded. "I know." The rest of the afternoon passed in quiet. We talked about trivial things. The weather, the neighbors, the garden. Everything was surface level, polite, careful. No laughter, no shared memories, no warmth. Finally he stood. "I should go. Clara will be waiting." I walked him to the door. My heart ached, but my face remained calm. "Goodbye, Daniel." He hesitated, then said softly, "Goodbye, Mom." The door closed. I stood there, alone. The house was silent again, but different now. The silence was no longer just absence. It was permanent. I went to the kitchen, picked up a small rose from the vase, and held it in my hands. "You've left me, Daniel," I whispered, "but I'll survive." Somehow, outside, the rain stopped. A single ray of sunlight pierced through the clouds, hitting the garden. I walked toward it slowly, feeling the damp earth under my feet. For the first time in weeks, I didn't cry. I simply whispered, "I am still here, and I will remain." The rose in my hand bent slightly in the breeze, petals trembling. "Even if you never come back, I said. I will bloom again. And in that quiet, I realized, the bond we had, the love I carried, was mine to keep, even if he couldn't. Some wounds don't heal, some hearts don't mend, and some love, no matter how deep, cannot survive being ignored. It had been weeks since Daniel's visit. At first, I clung to hope. Tiny flickers of it, fragile and desperate. Maybe he'll come again. Maybe he'll remember me before it's too late. But each day, each unanswered message, chipped away at that hope. One morning, the phone rang. Not Daniel's usual polite, tentative voice, but Clara's. "Margaret," she said. "Smooth and cold, Daniel and I are having a private dinner tonight. You don't need to worry about checking in." Private dinner. A phrase loaded with meaning I didn't want to accept. I forced calm into my voice. "Of course, thank you for letting me know." She didn't wait for a reply, just hung up. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me, the letters I had written still tucked in their box. I realized then, Daniel's life had moved on. Not gradually, not by accident, deliberately. He had chosen her, and she had ensured there was no space left for me. That evening, I went for a walk in the garden. The roses I had planted years ago were wilting. The petals scattered like fragments of my heart. I knelt down and touched one, feeling the rough edges of its stem. "You've replaced me, Daniel," I whispered. "Completely." I remembered the last time he had held my hand, hesitant, careful, and how he had let go. Hi. I realized then, he had been holding on to her for months, and every smile, every laugh, every quiet moment had been hers, not mine. A week later, Daniel finally came to the house. I had thought, perhaps, that the visit would rekindle something, a spark of the boy I loved. I was wrong. He walked in with Clara trailing behind him. She held his arm like a shield, like a barrier between us. "Mom," he said softly, "we wanted to stop by to check on you." I smiled politely, my voice calm, almost cold. "Thank you." Clara spoke before he could. "You've been here too often, Margaret. It's unsettling." A word burned. Not interfering, not annoying, unsettling. Daniel didn't argue. He didn't even meet my eyes. They toured the house with me, commenting on minor things. The curtains, the rug, the old photos. I tried to show him the wooden box with the letters, the notes, the memories I had preserved. Clara stopped me. "That's unnecessary, Margaret. Daniel doesn't need reminders of the past." I froze. "Doesn't need reminders," I whispered. Daniel looked away. "Mom,
He's just better this way."
better, not wrong, not hurtful, just better. For her, for him, not for me." They left shortly after. I didn't watch them go. I sat in the living room, the weight of the silence pressing down like stone. Everything I had hoped for, dreamed of, prayed for, gone. For the first time, I understood, this wasn't a temporary separation. This wasn't a phase. It was permanent. That night, I wrote in my diary, "There are parents who lose their children to tragedy, to illness, to fate. I have lost mine to choice. To someone else's love, someone else's control. He chose her. He always did." The words felt heavy, but true. I looked around the house. Empty, silent, unchanged. The walls still held echoes of the boy I had raised, but they were faint, fragile, fading. I realized then that I would have to let go. Not because I wanted to, not because it felt right, but because he had chosen. For days I barely spoke. I walked through the garden, tended the roses, prepared berten. For myself the world moved on outside. But inside, I felt frozen, suspended in a grief that had no name. Then, one afternoon, I opened the wooden box again. The letters, the drawings, the memories, all mine to keep. I held one letter in my hand, pressed it to my lips, and whispered, "You may never read this, Daniel. You may never see the love that waited for you. But it doesn't matter anymore. It was never yours to take." Weeks later, I stood in the garden, sunlight on my face, dirt under my nails, roses blooming in defiance. I realized something quietly, almost painfully. He had taken his place in the world. I had to take mine. I whispered to the empty air, I will survive this. I will bloom again. And I will do it without you, Daniel. The house was silent, yes, but the garden was alive. And for the first time, I understood that love doesn't always return the way we hope. Sometimes it leaves. And the only thing left is the strength to carry on. Sometimes, the ending isn't what you wanted. But in the ruins of what you've lost, you find a new kind of life. A life that belongs only to you. It had been months since Daniel's last visit. The final rift still raw in my heart. At first, the silence was unbearable. Every corner of the house, every empty chair reminded me of what I had lost. But slowly, imperceptibly, something began to shift. I started with small things, tending the roses in the garden, cooking meals for myself, savoring flavors without the ache of waiting for someone who wouldn't come, reading books I had put aside for years, losing myself in stories that reminded me that life went on, even when love faltered. Each day the weight of longing lightened slightly. One afternoon, while planting new seeds in the garden, I noticed a young girl from the neighborhood watching me. She approached hesitantly. "Mrs. Evans, can you show me how to plant flowers?" I smiled. "Of course, dear." For hours we worked together, hands in the soil, laughter spilling into the air. It was simple, quiet, and yet for the first time in months I felt alive. Days turned into weeks. Neighbors came by to admire the roses. The women from the community garden group stopped in to chat. Even the local kids would wave as they ran past my house. I was no longer just Margaret, Daniel's mother. I was Margaret, gardener, friend, mentor, storyteller. The walls of my house felt warmer, the air lighter, and the silence no longer deafening. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself in the garden alone. The roses were blooming wildly, vibrant and untamed, the colors of life itself. I knelt among them, brushing petals gently with my fingers. A soft breeze carried a memory. Daniel's laughter, his small hand brushing mine as a child. I closed my eyes, letting the memory wash over me. Then I whispered to the roses, to the garden, to myself, "You were my son, Daniel. You always will be. But you are no longer mine to hold. And that is okay." That night, I opened the wooden box of letters once more. I took out the one I had written but never sent. The letter that poured my heart onto paper. I read it slowly, feeling the pain of the words, but also the love that had never faltered. When I finished, I folded it, placed it back in the box, and smiled. For the first time I felt complete. Not because he returned, not because he understood, but because I had finally understood myself. Weeks later, a letter arrived. It wasn't from Daniel. It wasn't even addressed to me personally. It was from the community garden group. A note thanking me for the flowers, for my help, for sharing my time and knowledge. I held it in my hands, reading the words again and again. "Your care and dedication have inspired us all. Your garden blooms with more than flowers. It blooms with love, wisdom, and hope." Tears filled my eyes. Not tears of sorrow, not tears of longing, but tears of recognition, of my own strength, of my own life. Months passed. I continued to nurture the garden, teach the children, and welcome friends. The house, once cold and silent, was now alive with laughter and warmth. I still thought of Daniel, sometimes. The memory of him would never fade. But the ache had softened. I realized then that love doesn't always belong to the one we long for. Sometimes, love belongs to ourselves. One spring morning, as I walked through the garden, a single rose stood taller than the rest. Its petals opened wide, basking in the sunlight. I knelt and whispered, smiling, "This is mine. All of it. Every petal, every color, every bloom. And so am I." The garden was alive, vibrant, untamed, just like me. I looked up at the sky, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. I was free. I was strong. I was Margaret, and for the first time in decades, I felt completely, beautifully, undeniably alive. Life doesn't always give us what we want. Sometimes, it teaches us how to bloom in the spaces we never thought possible. And when we do, we realize that we were never lost. We were just waiting to grow. The roses swayed in the wind, the house hummed with life, and I smiled. I had survived. I had bloomed, and nothing, not loss, not betrayal, not absence, could ever take that away from me.